Welcome to the podcast where we dive deep with the builders, hustlers, and business owners, turning blue-collar grit into scalable badass businesses. We'll break down their origin stories, real-world struggles, systems that actually work, and advice they'd give to new local service business owners. I'm your host, Romario Martin, and this is the BADASS Remodeler Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the BADASS Remodeler Podcast, where we have real conversations with builders, hustlers, and remodelers turning blue-collar grit into scalable badass businesses. I'm your host, Romario Martin, founder of BADASS, the Google Ads agency helping remodeling businesses turn paid ads into qualified consultations and qualified consultations into booked jobs. Now, today's guest is someone who's reshaping how construction companies think about their numbers, their systems, and their future. Eric Fortenberry is the founder and CEO of JobTread, a project management and estimating platform built by a contractor who got tired of spreadsheets slowing down growth. Under his leadership, JobTread's become one of the fastest growing tech companies in North Texas, serving thousands of builders and remodelers across the country. And Eric himself was named Emerging Company CEO of the Year and a finalist for the EY Entrepreneur of the Year. Today, we're going to dive into his pain to product story, how he scaled in one of the hardest industries to modernize, and what he sees coming next for construction tech. So let's get into it. Eric, welcome to the show, man. It's great to have you here. Let's start at the beginning. Before JobTread was even an idea, what pulled you into the construction world in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you having me. I built and sold my first software company in 2015. As after that, a buddy of mine was running a construction company here in Dallas, but he was struggling to scale the business. He had gotten it, it was about 5 years in, gotten it to $5 million in revenue, had around 10 employees, but they just were really struggling to hit their target profit margin. Like scaling the business was a challenge. And so he had asked me to come over and help him figure out how to build a better business and how he could take it to the next level. And so I'll never forget the day I walked in and it was just like total chaos. Like there were just like papers everywhere, binders, like literally timesheets were walking in the door. They're putting them into these folders, putting them on the walls, like waiting for a project manager to come in and, approve it. And then like someone would like manually type it into this spreadsheet and it got copied to this other spreadsheet. And then someone else came and like typed it into QuickBooks. And I just immediately saw the inefficiencies and since have learned that like this is like a very common thing for construction businesses is like again the struggle with systems processes. Like they're more likely than not they're not business people, they're tradesmen, and they're people that are coming off built their careers kind of working in the tools and in the trades, and like again like this stuff was really apparent that it was bogging these guys down, and it was like making it hard for them to build and scale the business. And so I was just like, man, like, let me just go find you some software. We'll get you a system set up and you guys will be on your way. And I did a deep dive into everything out there from just a lot of different tools and solutions. And I made this huge spreadsheet, all the pros, the cons, the features, the cost. And, at the end of the day, though, like I struggled to make a recommendation for them, because it was either going to be like, super expensive, or it looked like it would, be like really antiquated, kind of real clunky, or, hard to customize for us. And, I struggled to make a recommendation for them. And they were like, well, you're a software guy. Can't you just build us something? I was like, whoa, hold on. Like, I was just here to, just kind of help a friend out. I wasn't necessarily like trying to take on a full-time job. And, I certainly knew they weren't going to be qualified to actually be able to maintain it after I left. And, so I hesitated for a while, and long story short, I ended up going back to them. I thought, man, like this could be a great opportunity. It's another huge industry, lagging in technology. Looks like a great opportunity for me. And so I agreed to come on and basically build out a system for them with 3 conditions. One, I told them, need to be made CEO. I need the full ability to hire, to fire, to implement whatever systems processes we need to do to get this ship on track. 2, I'll give you 1 year of my time. I'll literally show up every single day, in the office, like we will get this going. And 3, everything I build though is my intellectual property. So if at the end of that 1 year, if this had, potential to become my next software company, then I would be able to go and do that. And so, in 2018, they made me, CEO, partner of the business. And, basically I built JobTread out of a needs basis while running this construction company. We were able to grow them from 5 to 8 million in sales that year, and we increased their gross profit by 43%. So like literally hundreds of thousands of dollars were put straight to the bottom line by helping them to get organized, streamline our processes. We got all of our estimating. We've now built budgets for our jobs. We manage the scheduling, the crews. We use work orders, purchase orders, and ultimately we integrated with their QuickBooks to streamline that whole process. And so, it was a huge, transition for these guys. And, really excited to say it was in 2023, they broke $20 million in sales for the first time. So super awesome. They did a great job, taking it even beyond me. But after that 1 year in 2019, I officially started JobTread. I recruited my best developer, designer, and my CFO, and we essentially rebuilt the whole thing and set it up for others, where it could be used with multiple businesses. And we started selling it in 2021, got it to like 200 companies. 2022 got to 1,000. 2023 got to 2,200. Last year we had ended with about 4,500 customers. This year our goal was 7,500. Where we've already broken I think over 8,200 customers now. So we'll probably end the year around 9,000 customers, which really exciting just to see the growth. But it's been a great journey so far.
Beautiful, love that. Yeah, my dad's still using pen to paper right now, so I guess. When did you decide to build that first internal version of JobTread?
Yeah, so that was in 2018. I probably a couple weeks, maybe a month or so, being at the company, like kind of looking at everything out there, and it was just apparent, man, like just the software that had been created, that I was looking at was 15, 20 years old, right? Like, and it's, still around and, still probably one of the, some of the larger players out there, but like it, just, the speed of technology and just how fast it's evolving. Like we had a huge advantage to be the late mover, and being able to come in here and learn from everything else that was out there and like what worked well, we'll keep that. What didn't work well, we can improve on that. And we just got to leverage modern technology to build an easier to use, easier to learn, much faster web application that has now been, really successful for a lot of people.
So were you thinking this might be a company one day, or was it just, I need to fix this problem for the team right now?
I definitely was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I mean, when I sold my first business in 2015, I think I was 31, 32 years old. I was definitely too young to retire. My wife really wanted me to get out of the house. I was getting into the whole home automation stuff. I started, messing with plumbing. I like literally cut the main, the water main coming into our property, and like I spliced in this like automated like meter reader and shut off valve. And I think it was when I started playing with the electrical. She started like getting serious about me like going and finding something else to do with my time. Like I was putting in these like energy meters and like rewiring a bunch of things. And she's like, Eric, like I don't want you to die. We just got married. Like please go find something to do. And so I actually started the first kind of before the construction business, our outdoor landscape contractor. Started getting to spend more time with her. Like she awesome at her trade. Did a really great job with our backyard, our front yard. Very professional crews. Like everything looked very buttoned up. But like one day I realized like she wasn't invoicing me. And I thought, just cause like, we'd been kicking it and I've been giving her advice and just kind of guidance and this stuff. I thought, well, maybe, she really, values all this like advice I'm giving her for free. And so she's just taking care of my invoices. And I asked her one day, she goes, wait, what? You're not getting invoiced? I was like, yeah. Is that not intentional? She's like, no. And so like, I was like, all right, look, let me come see behind the curtain. I went into her office and again, it was just like chaos, like she literally had no idea who was getting invoiced, who wasn't. Like she was like, man, I keep working so hard. I'm making more and more money, but like, I see nothing going to the bottom line. Like, where's it going, Eric? And like, she also didn't have any systems and processes in place. So I set her up with an app, set her up with QuickBooks. Like, that was kind of like really where the spark for this whole thing, started. I went into the next business and I saw that same problem again. And so eventually I was just like, yeah, like, I mean, this would be awesome to be able for this to be my next business, right? Like to be able to help all these small businesses, these entrepreneurs, help them like get organized and streamline all their processes in an easy to use app. Cause like, there's just so much out there, but it's like, again, a lot of it's like really complicated and really confusing.
Yeah, for sure. And I've got to ask, what did the first version look like? Was it polished software or was it more like a Frankenstein in there?
Yeah, no, it was, so the first version was actually built on Google Sheets. So they had all these Google Sheets, that they had Google Sheets that kind of had all their jobs in it. And then they had a Google folder that had like this worksheet in there, and they were like cloning the same worksheet over and over and over again for every job. And then they had like another spreadsheet with like the schedule. And so I was like, man, like, I saw them moving the data from one tab to another, and that kind of like got me into like, well, let me go in and started playing with the backend script editor of Google Sheets. And so I started like building out these automations to kind of like move it from one tab to the next, and like to create a new job folder, clone the worksheet automatically, and so like it was actually a bunch of Google Sheets with the backend script editor pieced together. Funny enough, I think I hit like every possible limit on Google Sheets, to the point where like I had some Google developers reaching out to me. They're like, what are you doing here? What is going on? And like I got on the phone, I showed them. They're like, man, like, they were like pretty impressed. They actually invited me to go speak at Google I/O, the Google Developer Conference. It's like, I'm still working on this. I think I'm going to keep this a little bit closer to my chest. I wasn't ready to get out there and share it with everyone, but it was definitely a hobbled together system. And so we definitely had to rebuild it in order to set it up to be scalable and multi-tenanted, with like where we could have many companies using it. And my co-founder did a much better job building this app from scratch. Like he is the real developer here. I was just messing around. I had just gotten a software engineering degree earlier, and like he's the real deal.
Nice. So you built something that actually worked for your own contracting business. How did you go from internal tool to realizing other builders needed this?
Yeah, and I'm a big proponent of like, it's called dog fooding, right? Like you eat your own dog food. Like when you can build something out of a needs basis, like I feel like it's so much more genuine. I'm not just like creating some solution that I think some people need, but I don't really understand it. Like when I can like feel the pain every day, and I can create solutions to my own pain and problems, like that's how you build, a truly valuable solution. And that's how you build it as fast as you possibly can. Cause it's like, man, like every day that goes by, like this is painful. This hurts. Like, how do I, get this out there as quick as possible? And so, I think that was very, very helpful. But again, like, I had committed to giving them 1 year. And at the end of that year, I was like, man, like I appreciated the crash course in construction. It was a great opportunity for me to truly like, see how a construction business runs, the challenges that they have, like being able to like take that experience. But, I knew this was too good to leave sitting there with that one company, right? Like, I mean, literally seeing, the hundreds of thousands of dollars in profit that we generated just by helping them get organized. Like, I needed to get out there and help so many more people. And so, that's why, I gave my year, I honored my word. And after that, though, I needed to go, and we recreated everything, and, got it to many more.
Yeah. And construction can be a stubborn about change at times. So how did you convince those first few to trust a new system?
Yeah, you're so right about that. And I'll still remember like, early on, when I first came in there, and I was like, guys, like I want to create something new. Like I got so much resistance to change, from the employees, from the trade partners, subcontractors. Like, again, there was a lot of like kind of like hesitation, that resistance. And I think it's a very natural, thing for a lot of people who, again, they would say, oh, I'm not tech savvy, or like, they come up with all these reasons why they think they won't be able to do something, even though like it didn't even exist yet, but they were already resisting. And so like, you just got to kind of take all that with a grain of salt. But like ultimately, like what we did was every Wednesday morning we would have, the first Wednesday of every month, we'd have an all hands on deck. We brought in, again, all of our employees, all our field guys, subcontractors, even some vendors, suppliers, like, and so we brought everyone together, and we would spend time kind of just like talking about, the challenges that we were facing. Like, why, are all of these things happening? I asked each and every one, I'm like, what are your biggest challenges, with your day to day? Like, and I went and I actually shadowed the guys. Like I shadowed the estimators, I shadowed the project managers, did ride-alongs. Like I wanted to really understand, like, what are your challenges here? And when I got that, I asked each and every one, I was like, all right, if I could come back with a solution that would help improve this situation, are you down to try it and to use it? And they're all like, yeah, you're not gonna be able to do it, but yeah, sure. And so, I tried to get their buy-in early. I tried to like, really make it feel like it was, gonna be a collaborative process, and it was. And so, a couple months later, when I first, kind of had something to show, I presented it to the whole group, and then I sat down with each and every person, and I walked them through it, and kind of how it works and why it worked that way. And based on your feedback, we implemented this feature. feature. And like, a lot of hand holding, a lot of kind of like trying to get their buy-in, and then also explaining the bigger picture of like how this will help us transform the business, how this will help us win more jobs, how this will help us put more food on your plate, by everybody using it. Like, we needed the full team's buy-in to really maximize the opportunity. And, again, I'd say, we'll call it 3/4 of the people were down to play ball, and absolutely. And then, I had a couple of the holdouts, and, I'll never forget though. I mean, like, one of these guys, he's a project manager. I mean, he literally like was just like my biggest challenge, absolutely not. There's no way in hell I'm ever going to be using this. Like, blah, blah, blah. And like, he just seriously like was the most resistant to change. But like, interesting enough, like after I spent enough time with him and actually he started using it, he went from being my biggest like naysayer to my biggest champion, where he started getting pissed off at everyone else if they didn't enter their hours, if they weren't doing the daily logs, if they weren't uploading the files and updating the schedule. Like, he became the enforcer, which like goes to show that like, a lot of times you just got to sit down with people and help them understand that like, yes, you can learn. Yes, you can do this. This isn't rocket science. If you can scroll Facebook and use all those other apps you spend all that time on, like, you can learn this, and like when you get them comfortable with it, and then you also show them the benefits and help them understand the why, I think it's a lot easier to get that adoption. But to the point where like, again, we got everyone on it. I mean, I will say there were a few of our subs like definitely didn't, we basically told them like, if you want to get paid for today, you have to upload your photos. Like, you got to submit a daily log with photos of what you have done. I don't care if you're done or not. We need to see your progress photos. And that's how we're going to help oversee more and more jobs from afar and not have to be on the job site every single day. And some of them just, they didn't want to do it, and they, push back, and, you threaten to withhold a paycheck one time, and boy, that'll sure quickly change things. Same thing with the, we implemented the system where like every time they submitted bills to us, it needed to reference the PO, or the work order number. Like, otherwise, like, I mean, it's just like, when I dug into our accounts payable, like, we were just like bleeding out everywhere, right? Like, just, it was like death by 1,000 cuts. It was just the wild, wild west. Like, we were being double billed, overbilled. We had bills in the wrong job. And the only way to solve that problem was for every bill to reference the PO. What did we agree to pay you? We need to know that when the bill comes in, so the back office can go and just look it up and say, oh yeah, great. That's what we agreed. Boom, we're going to process the payment. But if that didn't match, then those were the ones that we needed to flag. That was when we needed to involve the project manager. And, again, we had a couple times where, the bills and the vendors that, they didn't put the PO number on there. And again, you reject it once, you reject it twice. I promise you, they figure it out after that when they're not getting paid. And they start putting that PO, right on there, and it, kind of worked itself out pretty quickly.
Love it. So one thing I love about your story is how measurable the results were, right? So you helped your construction company grow from around 5 million to 8 million in revenue, and boosted gross margins by more than 40%. Can you unpack that? Like, what were the specific levers did you pull? Was it like better estimating, tighter job costing, clearer communications, just some of those things?
Yeah, I mean, definitely all of that. I mean, I think there are a couple really pivotal things though. Like, when I got into the estimating side, like I wanted to understand, like, how can we not hit our target profit margins? Like, we consistently could not hit our target profit margin, right? And so like, I knew there had to be some fundamental flaw in how we were doing it. And so like, I went and I started shadowing these guys, and I'm sitting there, and this one day I realized, like, I saw the estimator, he was kind of writing down all of the costs that were going to go into this job. And then he totaled up what he thought it was going to cost. And then he went and he multiplied times 1.3. So we were targeting a 30% profit margin, but he was marking up the cost by 30%. And just like one day it finally clicked that, like, wait, whoa, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm adding 30%. Like, that's our profit, right? I was like, whoa, hold on. Like, and it's a very subtle formula difference, but like, that when you mark up your cost by 30%, the profit margin on that is 23%. So like, I realized, like, we were literally shooting ourselves in the foot right out of the gate. There was no chance we were going to hit a 30% profit margin when we were only pricing it for 23%. But nobody knew that because they just didn't understand the difference between markup and margin. Now the business owner, he understood the difference, but like he never like trained or shared that knowledge with the rest of the team. And so like he was doing it, but like nobody else did that. And so like that was like one of the biggest pivotal points of like, I was like, guys, put away your calculators. Like, this is ridiculous. Like I wanted them in like the core of JobTread is the job budget. And so like I gave them a tool and I wanted them to just focus on documenting every single cost that was going to go into this project. And not just like what it was, but like a detailed scope of work. We also couldn't use change orders because we didn't document anything and nobody knew what the hell we sold them. There's a bunch of finger pointing like, well, we talked about this and you said this. And it's like, well, we brought that up, but you didn't want to do that. And it's like a bunch of he said, she said stuff like I felt like I was mediating. And at the end of the day, like I couldn't prove whether we did or didn't sell them anything because we didn't have good documentation. And so having this budget tool where they could document what was in scope and out of scope, put in their cost, and then we would automatically calculate the price based on our target profit margin, like that, I think probably made the biggest impact on us being able to hit those profit margins. I mean, it was a night and day difference. And I'll never forget, like when I realized this and I told the guys, like, guys, look, we're underpricing our jobs. We need to make a change. And everyone's like, well, wait, we're not going to be able to make sales and we're going to have all these issues. And I was like, all right, fine. And I told them, I was like, we won't lose a deal over this change right here. If you get pushback, you let me know. We'll figure something out. Not one single time did any customer push back on that price change. And that's what confirmed for me, like we were just leaving money on the table. We were not accurately pricing our jobs like we should. We were not getting what we were worth, and we needed to make that transition. And I think that was huge. I mean, other than that, I mean, I do think the other reason why we didn't hit our target profit margins is that we weren't managing our cost correctly. We were paying people and paying our guys, time and material. We were paying them, either by the hour or by the day. We had kind of different rates, right? Like if it was, nights or weekends, they got paid more, holidays, they got paid more. But, we were essentially kind of letting them just bill us for however long the job took. Now, the problem is that we sold those jobs at a fixed price. But when we're paying them based on their time, like that means that we had a variable cost. And so, it was very clear, like there's no way we were going to hit our target profit margin when our cost is all over the place. And like, I'll never forget this one time. I don't know if you've heard of Undercover Boss, but I was like, all right, I decided, I'm like, why is this crew always so off? When we use this one particular crew of 3 people, why are we always losing? And so I decided I'm going to go and I'm going to show up on the job site. So I pull up around 8 a.m. I had already expected them to be there. Well, they don't show up till around 9. And I realized that's because they had to go to Home Depot to go shop and get all the materials gathered. And so like, I'm going to own that one. I learned my lesson. I should have had the materials ready to go on the job site, or at least have them ready for pickup. Like there's no reason why that crew had to go and shop for the materials. And so anyways, I'll take that one. Now around 11 o'clock, they realized they need to go back to Home Depot to get some more materials. And instead of calling the office, instead of calling the project manager, instead of just sending one person, literally all 3 of the guys get back in the truck and they drive back to Home Depot. And like, this is when I started noticing, like, this is one of those clients that's sort of like kind of peeping out and like watching the progress and like expecting things to get done. Like I could see them getting antsy through the window. And these guys, they go to Home Depot, they come back. So now, of course, it's around noon, around lunchtime. So they got to go get their microwave out of the truck, plug it in. They're sitting down on the job site for another hour. Like, it's just building, right? Building. I kid you not, man. They had to go back to Home Depot a 3rd time that day. All 3 of them. This is when I get that phone call. Like customers just pissed off beyond belief. Like, Eric, what the hell are these guys doing? They literally have done absolutely nothing. You told me they were going to get the job done. I don't even know where they are. They keep coming and going. Like, and so I was just like, man, like that was the moment when I realized like we were not aligned with how we were selling our jobs and how we were running the jobs. And so like we transitioned, like I built out this whole bid request system, work orders, we transitioned to like making everyone bid on the job. They need to go out there and tell me how long and how much. And if you tell me it's going to take you 5 days and you need $10,000, great. I plug that into my budget, I sell it, and then I convert that into a work order. And you know what? If you get it done faster, if you get it done in 3 days, awesome. Like, you're still getting your $10,000. You just get to move on to the next job faster. But if it takes you 7 days or 10 days or however long, that is now on you. You're still getting paid $10,000. And, like, barring any like change orders or unforeseen circumstances, but like, I kid you not, like, it literally overnight with this transition, those guys became like, the quality of their work just shot through the roof. They completed their times on job, on time, on budget. Like, like we were no longer going to pay them to go back out and do what they should have done the first time, because it's now on them. If you want to go screw around and, go back out and do punchless stuff and clean up and like everything you should have done, you're no longer going to get paid more to do that. And so I think those two things right there, if I had to say, the two things that did it is transitioning from using markup instead of margin and building out budgets, and then being able to have, guaranteed amounts, locking in our cost. I think those are the two things that fundamentally like really helped us to start nailing, our target profit margin.
So what have you learned about the money mindset that separates profitable contractors from the ones that are constantly fighting cash flow?
It's interesting, right? Like, I think at the end of the day, cash is king. Cash flow is so important. So many people don't understand that just because you've got some money in the bank today, that does not mean that that is your money. You could have $100,000 in your bank account right now, but like tomorrow, like you got to pay $200,000 of bills, so like it can be very, very deceiving for people. And I think like the crux of the issue is that, I see a lot of contractors, they don't understand their numbers. They don't know their true cost. They're not tracking their cost, and they're not doing it in real time. Like, job costing is like this foreign concept to so many people. And they're like, our bookkeeper will figure it out, or I don't have the time for that, or I don't know how to do that. Or, like I hear all these excuses why they can't do the job costing. And then at the end of the day, though, they're like the ones sitting there wondering where the hell's all the money gone. And like, I think that is like the crux of this, is that like, you have to understand your numbers and know what are your true costs. Are you pricing the jobs correctly? And then again, where's your overhead? How much, what to keep the lights on, keep the bills, keep the business going? Like, what do you need to do? And then at the end of the day, that's your net income. And I think a lot of people kind of mix up the difference between, their gross profit, their net income. They think that just because they're paying themselves and they're paying their people, like that they're building a healthy, profitable business. And like, that is not often the case. Like, you have to understand, what goes into managing the cash flow, because with construction, and especially as you start taking on larger and larger projects, that's cool and that's fun and that's exciting that like you start getting, bigger projects, but like at the same time, you are taking on more risk. Every single larger project you take on, if somehow that project goes south, you could find yourself in a deep, dark hole and owe a lot of money and have a lot of problems, where like that one job that you thought was like going to be the best job in the world, that could literally put you under. And so like, this is where, again, I'm so passionate about, JobTread, and like what we're doing for these contractors is like, this gives you the ability to track your job cost in real time. Like, if you see that you are over budget, then like you need to course correct immediately. Like, can you use change orders? Can you renegotiate with your vendor, your supplier? Like, what happened? Like, so many people don't stop to do performance reviews and analyze how did they perform on a job, and they keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Like, and then they think it's just going to get better. Like, I think that's like the definition of insanity. Like, that's crazy, right?
Yeah, exactly, man. So let's geek out for a second over the on the tech side of things. You had a choice early on to build everything from scratch or integrate with what already existed. So how did you make that call?
Well, I decided not to use the existing stuff and to build our own, but like, I do think that there's something to be said about, one of my co-founder, and he was the one that kind of made this call. Like, he said, look, like, we need to think of ourselves as a platform. Like, every business needs to have this ecosystem of solutions for their business. And there's no like magic bullet here. There's no like, one software that's going to like literally do everything that a business needs to do to be successful. And so like, at the end of the day though, like, his concept was like, we need to be an API first company. And what that means is like, we have this application programming interface, which is like ultimately like the foundation of JobTread is this API. And like, we built our own application on top of our API. And so that allows us, and that's why like JobTread is able to integrate and connect with just so many other applications out there, is because we put a big focus early on making it easy to get data in and out of our system so that you could set up those workflows and streamline those processes. Like anywhere that like people are doing like, the manual entry or doing the same thing over and over and over again, like if there's a way to automate that, 100% you should automate it. Like literally like, paying people to fat finger and type mistakes, like law of large numbers says like you will absolutely make mistakes, and so like this is where like you need to leverage technology, and why like we're really passionate about creating, a platform that leverages modern technology so that we can be the glue and be the platform that can bring in other point solutions that will help you, get exactly what you need done. Again, like QuickBooks is a great example. Like we're not an accounting system. And like, as much as people wish we would be an accounting system, like we're not. You need to have an accounting system. You need to have your books. Now we can integrate with that, and we can push in all of the data, and we can pull out data. And like when we can streamline that process, like you can still benefit and have all of the insight that you need, directly in JobTread without us having to try to replicate what is QuickBooks.
Yeah. So you guys definitely play nicely with accounting systems, CRMs, and all of that. Maybe touch on how important was that integration to adoption as well.
Yeah, I tell people the very first integration we built was actually with Zapier. And I think that like so Zapier is like this like middleware like solution where like as long as both applications integrate with Zapier, then like you can create these what are called zaps. So like you've got a trigger, like something happens in one system, and then it can take an action in the other. And so like I think that was probably one of the best moves that we made early on, because like that immediately opened us up to being able to integrate with thousands of other applications. We did not have to go build each and every integration to be able to like have the data flow, between the systems. Now, we obviously went and built out our own like, QuickBooks integration, right? Like, I'm not going to like have a third party in the mix of something that like is so fundamental and so important. But like, I think that the notion of just like being able to integrate with other systems was huge. Now, we recently just built our own workflows feature within JobTread that actually lets you like create whatever automations you want. And like, because a lot of people we saw like they were using Zapier, to create like, a JobTread to JobTread Zap to automate something. We're like, man, like you shouldn't have to go set up another account, with Zapier just to do that. So like we created our own workflows feature, and now, you can integrate JobTread directly with many other, solutions out there. But I think it's paramount, right? Like, at the end of the day, like, you got to be able to play nice with others and be able to make the connections, because like when you got something like a point solution that's just siloed off on its own and like it can't connect to other things, like that is where, again, the mistakes happen. That's where like the duplicate entry happens. Like those things are just primed to kind of just go under, because like they have to be connected. And when you can have multiple solutions integrated and connected, like the stickiness of all of it is so much more powerful, and it actually creates a lot of staying power for everything that's connected into that ecosystem. So I think it's like, again, one of the best moves we made was kind of having that first integration with Zapier and being able to enable all of this to happen.
Yeah, and looking ahead, everyone's talking about AI right now. So what's actually realistic for construction in the next couple of years versus what's just hype?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that question. We get asked all the time about it too. And and we've added some AI features in JobTread. I think in today's, age right here, right now, like the things that AI excels at is really, content, conversational type stuff. Like, it is very, very good at that. And, I think, marketing content, like replying to emails, writing up emails, drafting up, instructions, things like that. Like, it's a great tool to help kind of like, get ideas going. Like, I don't know how to solve this problem. Point me in the right direction. And, whether it's right or wrong, it gets your juices flowing and you go down a path instead of sitting there trying to figure out where to start. Like, it's such a great tool in that regard. And so we've added a lot of tools that, like, kind of, again, generating content and responses and messaging, a lot of that is in there. But, I see a lot of people that are still thinking like, man, like, I want AI to just generate my estimate for me and generate my schedule for me and do everything and me not have to do anything. And, I think that's like, that's still a pipe dream at this point. Like, we have so much like AI and LLMs, and different models that we've been using and running here. But like, I kid you not, like, you can ask it simple, basic questions that, like, simple math things that, like, you would expect it to be a no-brainer. And like, sometimes it somehow gets it wrong. Like when we go and we try like testing things, like, I'd call it like 60% of the time, the AI was great and it did a good job. Maybe in the next 20% of the time it was all right. I had to go fix a bunch of things, but like that last 20% of the time, the problem is it totally hallucinates. It makes up so much stuff that, like, my biggest concern with continuing to like go all in on AI at this point is that, like, my biggest fear is that somebody, would go into JobTread, would use some AI, would generate a proposal, send it out, gets it signed, and then gets into things and realizes, wait, I forgot something. The AI screwed up. It didn't include something. And now they're, $50,000, $100,000, in the hole because, like, there was a screw up. And like, the last thing I would ever want someone to do is be able to turn around and point the finger at JobTread and say, well, JobTread told me that, and then, like, again, I think there's a tremendous amount of liability that is going to come along with this. And it's like, who's right? Who's wrong? Like, this AI, like, it's like this easy button that I think a lot of people are going to end up pressing, not realizing that, like, your mindset should be don't trust and verify. Like, you have to assume that it's not right. And I think a lot of people are going to just start cutting a lot of corners, and it's going to lead to a whole bunch of problems, with jobs and with schedules. And, like, that's my biggest fear. Right. And so, like, our stance on it is like, we're going to implement it. We're going to do, add it in the areas that we think are, it's a good use case. It's strong right now, job summaries, things like that. Cool. But, like, we're still in a wait and see, holding pattern. Like, there are a lot of advances that still need to happen before it can actually do some of the rather complicated stuff, like estimating a job, like, scheduling out and managing, bunch of, factors that, like, it's just so hard, to think that, like, it really is going to just immediately be able to be dropped in and, like, solve people's problems today. I think we're still several more years out. Do I think it'll happen eventually? Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, the stuff that robots can do this day and age, I mean, it's mind blowing, but I think there's still a lot more, advancements that need to happen. And I also think the cost needs to come down. Like, it is extremely expensive to actually use AI in a scalable, integrated fashion. Like, I mean, to have to, like, think about, like, the volume of usage that happens, like, that could cause software companies to have to drastically increase their price. I think it was Sam Altman came out and said, like, people adding please and thank you into their chat GPTs, like, it literally is costing them tens of millions of dollars just to ignore please and thank you. He's like, please be very direct and do not say please and thank you, like, just as few words as possible. And, like, that is a real problem that AI is going to have to get way more efficient and become way more cost effective before, a lot of these companies are going to be able to actually implement and adopt it. I definitely see us getting there, and my thought too is that, eventually what I'd love to see us do is to kind of build out these integrations where we can make it where it's like a bring your own key, bring your own AI, like whatever AI you want to use, Claude or ChatGPT or Google AI or Gemini, whatever it is, like, you can go set up your own account and then bring it and integrate it with JobTread. And we will use those models and use, your account. Like, so if you want to, rack up a massive bill all day long and just sit there and do whatever you want to do, like, cool. But that doesn't mean that everybody else, all of our users, have to float the bill for those, like, smaller subset of people that just, like, could rack up a huge bill. I think a better approach is going to be through that type of integration where people can bring their own key, they can pay for their own usage, and then also they're choosing which model they want to use. So if your model's garbage, I mean, again, garbage in, garbage out, like, at least that kind of lets us stay at arm's length a little bit more, instead of them like, basically saying, well, JobTread's AI, said this and it was totally wrong. And, I don't want to mislead people. And that's my biggest concern with it.
Yeah, especially the hallucinations are crazy sometimes. It's nuts.
Yeah.
So switching gears, let's talk leadership. So going from tech contractor back to tech is a huge identity shift. What was the hardest part about leading a software company instead of, being on job sites?
I really see it as very similar, like I think at the end of the day, like, you've got to build a great team of people. And I think in order to attract the right people to your team, like you got to do some soul searching, really understand like what is your mission and vision? What are your core values? Like what are you passionate about? Why do you wake up every single day and want to fuel this company? What is the purpose of your business? And I think when people can be very, very clear and be very passionate about what they do, because look, at the end of the day, like life is too short to not spend it doing the things you love with the people you care about, trying to make an impact on the world around you. Like you got to know your why and be very focused on that. And I think when you figure that out, that will help you to be able to attract other people who have similar passions and similar desires, and like they want to be on a winning team. They want to work hard and be able to deliver exceptional customer experiences. But having that in all of these businesses, like I think that has really helped me to be able to bring together a phenomenal team of people that, again, I see them as the A+ players. They're the people that like, I literally have my whole heart can trust them to make the right decisions, to do the right things, to do whatever I would have done. Like I know that they embody the same core values that I would do. And I think when you can do that and you can assemble a great team, then like, the next thing you got to do is like focus on the culture. Like you have to build a great place to work. And I'm really proud. Like the last 4 years, we've been named the best places to work here in Dallas. And actually this year we just won for the first time. We're the #1 best place to work in the medium category, which had like, I think over 200 companies in that category. And like, the way that we've done that is by focusing on our culture. Like you have to find, how can you recognize your people? How can you show that you care about them? How can you show your appreciation for them? Like, like at the end of the day, like paying them a good salary, like that's just table stakes. You got to like really win their hearts, and you have to be the place that they want to come in every single day. And I think you do that, by again, like figuring out like what are the small things, that can really make it a great place. Like we have catered lunches on Mondays and Wednesdays. We celebrate our wins. Like we love to do happy hours and or breakfast tacos or team building events. Like, whatever it is, like, you got to find ways to like, celebrate and spend time together, not just working. There's a lot of work that goes into any given business, and it can become a grind. And so like taking the time away from the computer, away from the job site, away from whatever it is, and like go have fun. Go remember that life is about like, enjoying what you're doing. And like, you got to fill your cup and fill your people's cups and just take that time, go do volunteer events. Like we go do like, we've done Habitat for Humanity a couple times, like do the canned food bank, like packing up food for people. Like, it's those things that show that like, again, we're not just here for the paycheck and for the dollars and the cents that are coming through. Like we're here to make an impact on the world around us. And I think that is what in every business I've ever been in and will ever be in, like I want people to be attracted to that and to know that like we're here for something much greater than just ourselves. And when you can lead with that, I think that's how you build a great company, you build a great team. And it really doesn't matter what the product, what the service, what the industry is. It's about assembling an incredible team that will work hard and will accomplish goals. And, for me, that's what I focus on.
Sounds like a great place to work at for sure. So you're also the host of your own podcast, Builder Stories, where you feature builders sharing their journeys. So why did you start that podcast?
I think I've been doing it now. I think we're over almost 120 episodes, something like that. I remember early on the marketing team was like, Eric, are you sure you really want to commit to a podcast? Like, do you have the time to do that? Are you sure you're going to like, and I was just like, look, I think like this is so important that, we can take the time to like try to capture people's stories. Again, I think behind every business there are people, and those people have stories to share. And like being able to like, try to like, get that out of them. Like, why did you start your business? Like, what is your why? What motivates you? Like, and what has worked and what hasn't worked, right? Like, what are the challenges that you've faced and how have you overcome them? Like, the whole purpose of the podcast is to be able to try to like gather all of this information, this knowledge, and share it with everyone else out there. I want it to be an inspiration to people so that they know, like, you're not alone. Like you're so many people, like when you're leading a business, like you're at the top, like you feel very lonely. And I think like that's not the case. Like there's so many other people in the same situation going through the same challenges, or maybe they've already been through those challenges and they've come out on the other end. Like by taking the time to document that and share that with others, that helps them to be able to build more successful businesses and hopefully skip over a couple of those hard knocks and like not make the same mistakes. Because like, again, like it's so important, I think, to really share that knowledge and get that out. And like, that really is like that podcast, I think, embodies kind of the whole premise of our community that we have created around JobTread. And I think our Facebook group has like almost 8,000 people in there. Like we're here to help each other. I believe that a rising tide lifts all boats, and we need all contractors to be able to elevate and to do the right thing, to price their jobs correctly. Like, there are those contractors out there that are, that again, they're cutting corners, they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Like they're not, leading with integrity. They're not managing their cash flow. Like they're, whether they're literally trying to steal or not doesn't matter. The problem is that when they don't build successful businesses, they give the industry a bad rap. Like they screw over homeowners and they screw over customers, and like that creates this fear that contractors are somehow bad guys, and that's not the case at all. And so like I want to try to motivate and inspire them to up it, take their game to the next level, like invest in themselves. I mean, that's why, our software, it's $199 a month. Like literally, like this should be a nominal expense, but like to help these people get organized and to be able to manage their jobs and manage their finances and like sell this, like it will help all of us, and it will help the industry to become such a better industry and have such a better reputation. But we can't leave anybody behind. We can't let those couple bad apples, like, spoil it for the rest of us. Like we got to help them too.
Yeah, that's well said. So what's something you've learned from your guests that changed how you think about the industry?
Something I've learned from my guests, I would say I've definitely learned a lot. And I've seen that even though you may be building a different type of project or you're a different type of builder, contractor, like I've learned that like the fundamentals of managing businesses, regardless what type of work you do, like they're not really that different. The fundamentals haven't changed in like decades, and like when people start to get overwhelmed, they start to get lost and frustrated, like you got to bring it back to the basics. You need to have a strong foundation. And until you have a strong foundation for your business, there is no reason to focus on scaling. You do not need to over-engineer situations. You do not need to set up a bunch of processes until you need them. You need to focus on the day-to-day, the blocking and the tackling, and master that. Get really, really good at the basics, and then you start to add on, and then you start to scale. I see a lot of people though that like it's like they're trapped in this rat race and they just keep going around and around, and like at some point, like it doesn't matter how great you are at your trade or how smart you are. Like if you truly want to build a successful business, like you need to build a team. You need to recruit people around you. And again, I see a lot of people that just don't, for whatever reason, they feel like they can't afford it, or they can't, they don't know what they would do, or that person won't be as good as them. And like, they don't want to delegate. And like, there's all these reasons, but like at the end of the day, like you have to set yourself up for success. And so many people, they struggle to see the forest from the trees, and they don't realize that like, if you do a little bit of planning ahead of time, build an annual budget for your company, set goals for yourself. You're going to make a bunch of assumptions, and they're probably going to be wrong. And that's fine, because at least when you look back at how you performed last month, last quarter, last year, you'll be able to say, oh, I missed that, but here's why. I made this assumption that wasn't correct. And so now moving forward, how am I going to correct that? What do I need to do to adjust to make sure that I can hit my goals? I think that's so important that people think about, again, not just today and not just tomorrow, but like the future. How do you want to build this business? Like, what do you want to build? What is the legacy you want to leave? Like, and then plan for that. You have to see yourself and see your business being extremely successful, and then you will be able to make much more achievable goals and work towards that to accomplish them. But, again, so many people just, they can't take the tool belt off for 2 seconds to try to like realize like, look, I can't just work in my business every single day. I have to start working on my business to build a much more successful, much more scalable business. And so, I think I see it all the time, and so like, I hope people can really take that step back from time to time, go find podcasts, go follow other, leaders and influencers and people in your community, like study what are they doing. There's no reason that they can do something that you can't, but you got to go look for it and you got to go believe that you can.
Yeah. Something that you said just now, it actually reminds me of what my business coach always says is imperfect action, right? Just take that action and then adjust based off what you're seeing. So yeah, I love it. All right, let's zoom out. From your vantage point, what's still broken in construction that technology hasn't solved yet?
I think, when I think about it, kind of, I do believe that there's a lot of people and a lot of businesses, and again, they may be successful businesses that they're stuck in their ways. They have become complacent because they believe that since they have done something the same way for the last 10, 20, 30 years, since their family has been doing this for generations, like they think that is the way. And the reality is like times are changing and they're changing faster than they've ever changed before. And I think it's really important that people can again, like have an open mind. They need to focus on like continually learning new skills, learning new technologies, adopting new solutions, because like if you don't, the world is going to pass you by. The dinosaurs are dying. And if you want to stay competitive, you have to keep up with what everyone else in the market is doing. And so like, I think it's just, again, I see so many people just, they get so focused on the day to day that they don't go and invest in their own personal development. They don't hire coaches. They don't go to industry trade shows and events and conferences. Like they don't invest in professional development for themselves and their team. And like, that's how you're going to keep up with things. You have to go get involved with the community around you, go network with other people who are leading successful businesses and learn from them. Like that is the problem. I think it's truly a personal and a people problem and a mindset problem. The technology is out there. The solutions are out there, but like you got to see it and you got to know what your challenges are and then go find the solutions to those challenges and implement, take action. So like, I think that's the crux of it. That's why people are still on pen and paper and spreadsheets and yada, yada. Like there is a better way, folks, but you got to be open to that and you got to go take action to go find it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely sending my dad that part right there. He needs to get out of the pen and paper for sure. I've been telling him for years now. We're going to hit a quick lightning round before we wrap up. First thing that comes to your mind here. So a book or resource that changed how you lead.
Endless Customers by Marcus Sheridan. Hands down, this guy is incredible. He's actually our keynote speaker at our upcoming annual user conference. If you hadn't read that book, the first version of it was called They Ask You Answer. So this is the next version of it. And he's taken everything into account, all the modern AI, SEO, how websites, how videos, like, man, you got to go read that book. It's my number one recommendation, Endless Customers.
And then biggest mistake that taught you the most?
Biggest mistake that taught me the most. I think ultimately I would say that there have been times where I have really struggled to make the hard call to remove somebody from the team because they were a close friend, somebody I really, really cared about more than just a colleague, but I knew in my gut that they weren't the right person. I knew they didn't have the right skill set, but I just, I took way longer than I should have to make that hard call and to remove that person. And I think that was very, very eye-opening, having gone through that. And I've gone through it a couple times. It's It's very hard, but like you cannot kick the can down the road. If you've got somebody on your team who you know should not be on your team and you've exhausted your efforts to coach them and to try to get them to where they need to be, like you got to make that hard call. And at the end of the day, like your team will be better for it. It'll actually be a relief eventually once you get past that hard, I mean, it's like a breakup, right? Like, and it's your own self-inflicting breakup, but like you got to do it. And I think at the end of the day, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your team.
One tool or system every remodeler or contractor should have in place.
Oh, well, JobTread, obviously.
Obviously. And then what gives you optimism about the future of construction?
Man, it's hearing all the stories like that I hear every day. I mean, I hear them on my podcast. I hear them. We do boot camps in person once a month. We got our big annual user conference coming up. Like, I'm super active on Facebook. I hear it all the time. Impact that, tools like JobTread and just the impact that like, our team has been able to make. Like I see so many success stories of people who literally thought they needed to just shut the doors, wrap it up, weren't going to be able to make it. And then like to know that like, they were able to dig themselves out of that ditch. They were able to pay off that massive debt. Like they were able to build a successful business. It took a lot of hard work for those people. But when I see that, it reminds me of like the entrepreneurial spirit and the drive that this country gives all of us. It is such an incredible opportunity to be here in America and be able to create our own businesses. Like I know that people can get really down and being an entrepreneur is like being on a roller coaster, man. Like you got ups and you got downs, but like if you can just learn to appreciate the times when you're down and you're low and know that, look, when you hit rock bottom, there's only one way to go. It's straight up, or maybe it's a gradual up, whatever it is, like you got to go up, like, appreciate those hard times. And I've seen so many people, like countless people who have been able to turn it around and have been successful, and it has changed their life. That is what gives me hope. That is what gets me excited and gives me optimism and believes that anyone who sets their mind to something can achieve it with enough hard work and enough focus and being very intentional and implementing and holding yourself accountable. Like you can be successful.
Awesome. Eric, this has been awesome, man. Tons of value for remodelers and builders listening. For anyone who wants to connect, where should they go?
Yeah, I would say, obviously you can learn a lot from our website, jobtread.com. I'm very active on Facebook, LinkedIn, happy to answer any questions, but I would encourage you. If you want to learn more about JobTread, please do go to our website. There's a schedule a demo button right at the top. Our team is happy to spend however much time walking you through it, showing you how it would work, what it would be like for your business. Like we want to make sure it's a good fit. We're not here to like lock you into some contract. It's literally $199 plus $20 per user. You can do month to month, cancel at any time. We even have a 30-day money back guarantee. We do let you upgrade to an annual plan if you want to get the 20% discount for prepaying for a year. But like, I encourage you to take some time. Like we're here to help you. I would be happy to hop on Zoom to help anyone out there. Like, whatever it is, just pretty easy to find me online. Just Google me and let's connect.
Perfect. If you're listening or you're serious about systematizing your business, go check out JobTread. Yeah, Eric, appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much for coming on. Again, ton of value there for everyone.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
Perfect. If you're listening and you're serious about implementing systems in your remodeling business, go check out JobTread. And if you want help generating more qualified leads and jobs, head over to badtobadass.com and book a free Badass discovery call today. Catch you in the next one. Thanks for tuning in to the BADASS Remodeler Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and pulled some real no bullshit takeaways to help you grow your business and your mindset. If this episode hit home, do me a favor. Share it with another remodeler or business owner who's out there grinding to build something better. Don't forget to follow the show so you never miss a conversation that could change your game. And if you or someone you know has a badass story to share, please contact us at badtobadass.com. We'd love to hear it because your wins can inspire the next builder up. I'm Romario Martin, reminding you to keep building bold, keep leading strong, and stay badass.